Welcome to the Sleep Podcast channel. Subscribe if you enjoy long-form investigative documentaries, because today we are embarking on a massive deep dive.
And it is a complicated one, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've been following the news, you know that back in February we covered the growing concerns surrounding Lucy Letby's convictions. Well, since then, major new evidence and developments have emerged.
Right. The landscape has shifted incredibly fast between February and May of 2026.
It really has. So we are doing a comprehensive deep dive into these staggering new developments. And, let's just ground ourselves in reality for a second. The stakes here could not possibly be higher.
No, they couldn't. Letby is currently serving 15 whole life terms.
Right, meaning she's never going to be released. She was convicted for the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 7 others.
Which is an unimaginable tragedy. But right now, we are seeing this massive wave of new expert reports, along with some really intense parliamentary scrutiny.
Yeah, and it's sparking this fierce debate over whether this is the correct verdict or, quite possibly one of the most profound miscarriages of justice in modern medical history.
Exactly. And because the subject matter is so heavy, we need to be incredibly disciplined about our information today.
Definitely. We have to look at the sources. What exactly are we pulling from for this deep dive?
Well, we're looking at a very specific, verified stack of sources. We have official parliamentary records, specifically Hansard, which features a major speech by Sir David Davis.
Right. That speech was heavily critical of the investigation.
It was. And we also have public statements and timelines from the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the CCRC. Plus, peer-reviewed scientific reviews, detailed journalistic investigations from The Guardian, The Independent, Private Eye, and of course, the official court transcripts.
Okay, so that is a ton of very dense material. And before we jump in, just a critical reminder for you listening at home.
Yes, this is important.
We are not here to take sides. Imagine sitting on that jury, trying to weigh all this. It's incredibly difficult. So we are looking at this strictly through the lens of the evidence.
Right, we are just separating proven facts from reported claims and outlining the disputed issues.
Exactly. We are impartial observers navigating a really sensitive situation involving the heartbreaking loss of infant lives. So, with that said, let's start with the current legal process. Where do things actually stand right now?
So the current legal battleground is the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the CCRC.
And they're the independent body in the UK that investigates suspected miscarriages of justice, right?
Exactly. And in February 2026, the chair of the CCRC, Dame Vera Baird, did something incredibly rare.
Oh yeah, the public statement.
Right. She issued a public statement specifically to limit possible misunderstandings about how long the review is taking.
Because people have been wondering why it's dragging on so long.
Yes. She laid out a precise timeline showing that Letby's legal team actually submitted a preliminary application way back in early February 2025.
Okay, wait, so it's now well over a year later. You can totally understand why people are asking about the delay. If there's new evidence, shouldn't they just look at it and make a decision?
Well, it sounds simple, but the mechanics of an appeal are just incredibly complex. And what's fascinating here is the specific bottleneck that Dame Vera Baird highlighted.
Which was the legal privilege waiver.
Yes.
Sure.
On February 13th, 2025, which was just days after receiving the initial application, the CCRC requested a waiver of legal privilege.
To get into the original defense files.
Right. But they didn't actually receive that waiver and the material that goes with it until December 11, 2025.
That is a massive gap. That's 10 months.
It's a 10-month gap where the CCRC essentially had their hands tied.
Hold on, let me stop you there. Why would the defense withhold that waiver for almost a year? If they're pushing for an urgent appeal, that sounds completely counterintuitive.
You would think so, yeah.
If your client is imprisoned for life, wouldn't you just hand over every single piece of paper immediately?
Well, it comes down to the fundamental nature of what the CCRC actually does. It is not their job to determine innocence or guilt.
Right, that's for the courts.
Exactly. The CCRC's statutory role is to investigate and see if there is, quote, new evidence or new argument that creates a real possibility that the appellate courts won't uphold the conviction.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah. So to argue that evidence is genuinely new, the CCRC needs to know exactly what the original defense team, led by Ben Myers KC, knew during the original trial.
They need to understand the strategy.
Precisely. And specifically, one of the biggest questions surrounding this trial is why the defense chose not to call any medical expert witnesses to the stand to counter the prosecution's experts.
Ah, okay. So it's like The CCRC are basically acting like the ultimate forensic auditors here.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like they can't just look at the final receipt at the end of the trial. They have to go into the back room, comb through every line item, every crossed-out draft, every email between the lawyers, just to figure out why the legal team made those specific choices.
Right, because legal privilege is the sacred cornerstone of the justice system. It protects all communication between a lawyer and their client.
So without the waiver, they were locked out.
Completely locked out of the defense's strategy room. They couldn't formally assess whether the 31 new expert reports being submitted by Letby's new barrister, Mark MacDonald, actually constituted new evidence.
Oh, wow. 31 reports from, what, 26 international specialists?
Yes, it's a staggering volume of submissions, but without the waiver, the CCRC couldn't know if this was truly new or if it was just material the original defense already had but strategically chose not to use.
That is a really massive distinction, because if the original lawyers had the reports, looked at them and said, oh, we shouldn't use these, then it's not new evidence at all.
Exactly. It would just be buyer's remorse on the legal strategy.
Right, like a new lawyer just wishing they had run a different play, and courts don't usually accept that for an appeal.
They generally do not. But now that they finally have the waiver, the review is fully underway. And while the CCRC pores over the legal strategy, the actual content of these new expert submissions is really paring at the seams with the prosecution's two main pillars from the trial.
Which are the statistics and the medical evidence.
Right. Let's look at the statistics first.
Because this is where the public narrative really took hold.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask anyone on the street about this case, they bring up the spreadsheet.
Oh, the shift roster, yeah. During the trial, a central, absolutely devastating piece of the prosecution's case was this infamous shift roster.
Right, the spreadsheet presented to the jury.
Yeah, it showed that out of 25 serious untoward events, which in medical terms means collapses or deaths, Lucy Letby was the only nurse on duty for every single one.
And visually, that is just incredibly powerful. It paints a seemingly undeniable picture, a pattern of death that basically just followed one specific person.
It's highly compelling. But then, in March 2026, Sir David Davis stood up in Parliament and delivered this blistering critique of the police investigation, which was called Operation Hummingbird.
Yeah, he argued that the roster wasn't just flawed, but fundamentally misleading.
Right. And this raises an incredibly important question about how we use data in criminal justice. Sir David Davis, who is relying on analyses from prominent statisticians and former senior police officers, pointed out a massive issue.
Which was the missing data.
Yes. He noted that the roster presented to the jury missed at least 10 other deaths or serious collapses on that neonatal unit that occurred when Letby was not on duty.
Wait, they just left them off the spreadsheet. How does that even happen in a high court trial?
Well, the argument from statisticians, including Professor John O'Quigley from University College London, is that if you compile a spreadsheet after you already suspect someone, you naturally fall prey to confirmation bias.
So they looked at a specific time frame, focused on the events where she was present, and essentially discarded the ones where she wasn't.
Exactly. And this is a classic example of what's known in legal and statistical circles as the prosecutor's fallacy.
Right. And didn't Sir David Davis also mention something about a statistician the police hired early on?
Yes, Dr. Jane Hutton. She's one of the country's leading statisticians. Cheshire Police consulted her, and she reportedly warned them early on that their statistical approach was entirely wrong.
But they ignored her.
According to the claims made in Parliament, yes. When her findings didn't support their thesis, her warnings were ignored and her involvement ended.
Okay, let's unpack this with a real-world analogy so you at home can really visualize this.
Yeah.
Explain the selective statistics issue, like removing CCTV clips.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like imagine a security guard removes all the hours of footage where nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
And they only splice together the moments a specific employee walks past a broken window.
Right. If you only see those clips, that employee looks incredibly suspicious.
Exactly. You'd watch that tape and think, well, they must be breaking the windows. But it completely ignores all the times the window broke when they weren't even in the building.
That is a perfect analogy. You are artificially creating a pattern by withholding the broader context.
And the context of the hospital during that specific period in 2015 and 2016 is absolutely vital.
It really is. The neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester had taken on more babies than usual.
And these were sicker babies too, right?
Yes, babies with lower birth weights and far more complex medical needs than the unit was typically accustomed to handling. And at the exact same time, the unit was dealing with severe understaffing.
Which was documented by the Care Quality Commission.
Right, the CQC, the independent regulator in England. They found the unit was understaffed and lacked adequate resources.
And it wasn't just the staffing. I was reading in The Independent that the actual physical environment of the hospital was failing.
Yeah, the building itself. There were reports of severe plumbing issues. Raw sewage was occasionally backing up into sinks on the ward.
I mean, that is just horrific. So you have a highly fragile population of premature infants in a highly stressed, under-resourced, and unhygienic environment.
Exactly. And in that context, statisticians and medical experts are arguing that clusters of adverse events can, and tragically do, happen without any malicious intent whatsoever.
Okay, I hear that. I really do. But let me push back here for a second.
Sure.
Even with missing data on the spreadsheet, and even with a stressed hospital, isn't it highly improbable for one single nurse to be present for so many collapses? I mean, even if you add the 10 missing cases back in, it still feels like a massive red flag that she was there for 25 of them.
It is a red flag, absolutely. But in science and law, statistical correlation is not causation.
Right.
If you are going to rely on a statistical cluster to point the finger at a suspect, you must be absolutely medically certain about the causes of those specific events.
You have to prove those 25 events were unnatural.
Exactly. A spreadsheet can only point a finger. It takes hard medical science to actually prove a crime happened, which forces us to look at the blood work and brings us to the second pillar of the prosecution's case.
The medical evidence. Because like you said, the statistics alone don't put you in prison for life. It was the medical testimony that seemingly proved deliberate harm.
Right. And the most compelling, the most terrifying part of that medical evidence was the allegation of deliberate insulin poisoning.
Yeah, that was huge during the trial.
It was foundational. For two babies, known in court as Child F and Child L, the prosecution argued that Letby deliberately added synthetic insulin to their intravenous feed bags.
And the judge actually told the jury how to weigh this, didn't he?
He did. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Joss, explicitly told the jury that if they were sure these two babies were deliberately poisoned, they could use that finding to inform their decisions on the other, more ambiguous charges.
Wow, so the insulin charges were basically the anchor for the entire case.
They absolutely were.
So how did they prove it was synthetic insulin? Because you can't just look at a baby and know that. You have to test for it.
Right. They relied on a specific blood test called a Roche immunoassay. In both of these babies, this test showed extremely high levels of insulin alongside extremely low levels of something called C-peptide.
Okay, C-peptide. I think we need to break this down. To understand why this matters, we have to look at normal biological conditions, right?
Yes. When the human body naturally produces its own insulin, it simultaneously produces C-peptide. They are created together in the pancreas.
Okay, I love a good analogy for this stuff. Explain insulin and C-peptide like matching train tickets that normally appear together.
Okay, imagine your body makes a journey to produce insulin, and the biological machine always prints two tickets on the same roll of paper. One ticket for insulin, one ticket for C-peptide.
They are physically linked.
Yes. So if a doctor finds a massive pile of insulin tickets in the blood, but almost no C-peptide tickets, you have to assume the insulin didn't come from the body's natural machine.
Right, it must have been sneaked in from the outside. That's the logic.
That is exactly the logic the prosecution used, and it makes perfect sense on a surface level. But, and this is where the new evidence becomes so critical, what if the ticket reading machine is known to occasionally glitch and misread the tickets?
Oh, you mean the immunoassay test itself?
Exactly. The immunoassay test used by the hospital laboratory is designed for quick clinical screening to help doctors make fast treatment decisions. It is not designed for forensic proof of murder.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the actual manufacturers of these tests explicitly state in their own literature that they can suffer from cross-reactivity or analytical interference.
Meaning the test gets confused by other substances in the blood.
Exactly. The antibodies in the test can bind to the wrong molecules. So in a normal clinical setting, if a doctor gets a strange result like incredibly high insulin and incredibly low C-peptide, the standard protocol is that you must send the sample to a specialized secondary lab.
For corroborating tests.
Right. Specifically, a test like mass spectrometry, which physically separates the molecules and can definitively prove if the insulin is synthetic.
And according to the new evidence submitted to the CCRC, that definitive secondary test was never done.
Correct. The blood was never sent for mass spectrometry.
That is wild.
And now the CCRC has an 86-page report authored by 7 of the world's leading experts in immunoassays, pediatric endocrinology, and hyperinsulinism.
These are the people who literally write the textbooks on this stuff.
They are, and they argue the immunoassay results presented at trial were fundamentally unreliable for a criminal conviction, and that the jury was inadvertently misled about the certainty of the science.
And that's not all, is it? Because I was reading about another report specifically regarding the baby's blood sugar levels.
Yes, the Chase and Shannon report. In addition to the immunoassay experts, there is a separate 100-page report submitted by researchers Jeff Chase and Helen Shannon.
And they are experts in biochemical and biomedical engineering, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Now, the prosecution had argued that the prolonged periods of low blood sugar experienced by these babies were proof of a sustained, deliberate poisoning.
Because normally it would bounce back faster.
That was the prosecution's claim. But Chase and Shannon's research points out that prolonged, erratic, low blood sugar levels are actually not unusual in highly stressed premature infants.
Because their metabolic systems are so severely underdeveloped.
Exactly. Their bodies just don't regulate sugar the way an older child or adult would.
Okay, but hold on. If the immunoassay test isn't definitive on its own, and the scientific community openly acknowledges it's prone to glitches, why did the jury rely on it so heavily to establish a pattern of deliberate, calculated harm?
Because the jury relies on the experts called to the stand to guide them. I mean, the jury isn't made up of biochemists.
Right. They're ordinary people trying to do their civic duty.
Exactly. They trust the authority, the confidence, and the credentials of the medical professionals giving evidence under oath.
Which raises a massive, newly uncovered issue regarding the credibility of one of those very experts.
Yes, it does. And this brings us to the explosive investigation published by The Guardian in March 2026.
Honestly, this part stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
It is a shocking revelation. The prosecution's key expert witness on the insulin cases, the person explaining those train tickets to the jury, was Professor Peter Hindmarsh.
And he provided absolutely crucial testimony.
He did. He definitively stated to the court that the insulin must have been administered exogenously, meaning from the outside. However, The Guardian revealed that while Professor Hindmarsh was giving this evidence, he was actively under a fitness to practice investigation by the General Medical Council.
The GMC, the regulatory body for doctors in the UK. And this wasn't just a minor administrative issue, right? Like a late paperwork filing.
Far from it. The GMC investigation included allegations of harm to patients. His contract as an honorary consultant at Great Ormond Street Hospital had actually been terminated months before the Letby trial even began. And a medical tribunal looking at his case during the trial period noted that he, quote, may pose a real risk to members of the public. They explicitly stated in their documents that the allegations against him may have the potential to impact on his ability to act as an expert witness.
But the jury was never told any of this.
No. They were kept entirely in the dark.
They sat there in the courtroom, listening to his definitive conclusions about the insulin poisoning, completely unaware that the man speaking to them was having his own medical practice subjected to severe regulatory scrutiny.
That is correct. The Crown Prosecution Service, specifically the prosecuting barrister Nick Johnson, KC, actively opposed disclosing this information to the jury.
Hold on, though. I have to play devil's advocate here for a minute.
Sure.
Just because he was under investigation doesn't mean he was guilty of anything. The prosecution was technically right, wasn't it? The GMC hadn't made a final ruling?
Legally, the presumption of innocence is paramount, yes.
Right, so why should an unproven allegation torch his entire testimony? Doesn't everyone deserve the presumption of innocence until proven otherwise?
It is a fair point. And the prosecution argued that because there was no final adjudication, the investigation wasn't relevant to his expertise on endocrinology. However, there is a profound irony here.
Which is?
The presumption of innocence is the exact standard at the heart of the debate surrounding Lucy Letby herself. And in criminal law, the defense is generally entitled to full disclosure of any material that might undermine the credibility of a prosecution witness.
I mean, explain expert credibility like relying on a referee in a championship match.
Right. Okay.
Like, you trust the referee to make the right calls because of their badge, their authority, the uniform they wear. But if you find out later that the referee's own conduct was being investigated for match fixing during the game,
you would instantly question every single penalty they called.
Exactly. Even if they made the right calls, the trust is broken because the league deliberately kept it a secret from the fans and the players because the investigation wasn't finished yet.
That analogy strikes at the very heart of the justice system's reliance on expert testimony. In a highly complex medical trial, the expert is the referee. They're translating a foreign language for the jury.
And adding to the controversy, the GMC investigation into Professor Hindmarsh was never actually concluded, was it?
No, it wasn't. He utilized a legal mechanism known as voluntary erasure to remove himself from the medical register in late 2024.
Wait, explain voluntary erasure. What does that actually mean in practice?
In the UK, a doctor under investigation by the GMC can apply for voluntary erasure, which means they voluntarily give up their license to practice medicine.
And the investigation just stops.
If the GMC accepts it, yes. It effectively ends the probe without any formal regulatory findings of guilt or innocence against him. He keeps his record technically clean, but he can no longer practice.
Wow. So the critics argue this denied the defense the opportunity to ever see the final conclusions of that investigation.
Precisely. And importantly, Professor Hindmarsh wasn't the only expert whose methodology has been heavily criticized.
Right. So David Davis also went after Dr. Dewey Evans in his parliamentary speech.
Yes, Dr. Evans was the lead medical expert for the prosecution. He was brought in early on, reviewed all the medical files, and initially identified which cases were suspicious and which ones weren't.
And according to Davis, who was quoting former senior police officers, Dr. Evans cherry-picked cases to match Letby's shifts.
He did. Davis claimed Evans wrote reports that lacked balanced, objective opinions, and there were allegations that he diagnosed deliberate harm in cases where previous independent clinical reviews had found none.
And didn't the National Crime Agency suggest doing something different?
They did. Davis noted in Parliament that the National Crime Agency, which is the UK's equivalent of the FBI, had advised Cheshire Police to appoint a multidisciplinary panel of independent experts to review the deaths.
Instead of just relying on one guy?
Right. But the police relied almost entirely on Dr. Evans. He acted as both the primary police advisor shaping the investigation and the principal prosecution witness in court.
Which, for a lot of legal observers, is a glaring conflict of interest.
It certainly raises questions about objectivity.
Okay, so synthesizing what we have so far, we have statistical data that may have been selectively compiled to fit a narrative. We have medical tests that may have been misinterpreted by experts whose own credibility and independence are now under fire.
It's a lot of doubt being cast on the scientific pillars of the case.
But, as anyone who followed the trial knows, the prosecution didn't just rely on charts and blood tests. They had eyewitness testimony.
Yes, they did.
And that is incredibly powerful for a jury.
It is. And this is where the review of the evidence takes a really dramatic, deeply unsettling turn. Because human memory is a fragile thing.
Let's talk about child K, because one of the most visceral moments in the entire trial involved this severely premature baby born at just 25 weeks gestation.
Right. And the key witness here was Dr. Ravi Jayaram, a senior consultant pediatrician at the hospital.
At trial, Dr. Jayaram gave a very vivid account. I remember reading the transcripts.
What did he say exactly?
He testified that he felt uncomfortable because Letby was alone with the baby in the nursery. He said he walked into the room and essentially caught her.
He painted a very clear picture for the jury.
Yeah, he testified she was standing by the incubator doing nothing, not raising an alarm, while child K's breathing tube was dislodged and oxygen levels were plummeting.
That testimony was devastating. It provided a cinematic narrative of Letby being caught in the act of deliberate harm.
And Letby maintained she had no memory of this specific event.
Right. She argued that breathing tubes can and do dislodge naturally in active premature babies, and that she would never stand by and watch a baby desaturate.
But now there's a massive wrinkle in that narrative. Newly discovered emails from that exact time period reportedly reveal a very, very different sequence of events.
Yes. According to reports emerging in early 2026, these contemporaneous emails suggest that it was actually Lucy Letby herself who summoned Dr. Jayaram to the unit to ask for his help with the deteriorating baby.
I mean, let's explain this conflicting evidence, like hearing one version of an event in court, right? A vivid, dramatic memory of a doctor walking in and catching someone red-handed.
And then finding the emails.
Yet later finding written emails from that exact same period that appear to tell a completely different, much more mundane story of a nurse simply calling a doctor for help. How do we reconcile that?
Well, we have to examine this critically and skeptically, but fairly. We don't have to speculate on malicious intent or perjury by the doctor.
Because memory is fallible.
Exactly. The science of human memory tells us that it is notoriously unreliable, especially years after a high-stress traumatic event. Dr. Jaram was testifying in 2023 about an event that occurred in the middle of the night in February 2016, 7 years prior.
And the brain just fills in the gaps over time.
It does. It is psychologically common for the brain to reconstruct memories, especially when a person becomes firmly convinced of someone else's guilt in the intervening years.
But the justice system places immense weight on contemporaneous written records, like emails or shift logs.
Because they are frozen in time, they don't succumb to hindsight bias. If emails from that night show Letby calling for help, it fundamentally contradicts the courtroom narrative of her standing silently while a baby died.
But again, I have to ask the obvious question.
Go ahead.
If these emails existed, why on earth weren't they presented by the defense during the original trial? It seems like a massive, inexcusable oversight. I mean, if I'm on trial for my life, I want my lawyer reading every single email I ever sent.
That is precisely the kind of question the CCRC will be asking right now that they finally have the waiver of legal privilege.
Were they just unaware of them?
Maybe. Or did they have them but fail to recognize their significance amidst millions of pages of disclosure? Or is there another context to the emails we don't yet understand?
It's just wild to think something so crucial could be missed.
What we do know is that by mid-2016, the atmosphere within the Countess of Chester Hospital had become incredibly toxic, which severely complicated the gathering and interpretation of evidence from the very beginning.
Which brings us to the culture of the hospital itself. It seems to have been a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Let's trace this timeline.
Okay, the timeline is crucial here. In July 2016, following the tragic deaths of two triplets, Letby was removed from her clinical duties on the neonatal unit and reassigned to a clerical patient safety office.
And the hospital framed this as a period of clinical supervision for all staff initially, right?
Yes, but Letby quickly realized she was the only nurse being removed from the ward.
And she didn't just accept it quietly. In September 2016, she filed a formal grievance against the hospital for how she was being treated.
She did. And around that time, the hospital management, led by Chief Executive Tony Chambers, actually investigated the sudden spike in neonatal deaths. They commissioned external reviews from the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health.
And what did those external reviews find?
They pointed to severe systemic issues, understaffing, a critical lack of senior doctor cover on the ward, and an overburdened unit taking on babies with needs far too complex for their facilities.
So they didn't point the finger at Letby?
No. Crucially, the hospital management initially found no definitive explanation for the deaths and explicitly described the senior doctor's suspicions against Letby as, quote, subjective and unsupported by evidence.
But the senior consultants, specifically Dr. Stephen Brewery, Dr. Ravi Jayaram, and Dr. John Gibbs, strongly resisted her return to the ward.
Yes, they were utterly convinced she was the common denominator in all these collapses. The trial records show they even demanded the installation of covert CCTV cameras in the nursery if she was allowed back on the ward.
I mean, it was a total catastrophic breakdown in communication and trust.
You had management focusing on systemic failures, and the consultants focusing entirely on the actions of one individual. Eventually, frustrated by a management's refusal to permanently remove Letby or call the police, the consultants bypassed the executive team entirely and went directly to Cheshire Police.
And that call sparked Operation Hummingbird.
Exactly.
You know, it's like being on a sinking ship where the officers are screaming at the engineers about who caused the leak while nobody is actually trying to fix the hull.
That's a very apt analogy, and it speaks to a broader, highly controversial concept in modern medicine, which is the criminalization of clinical failure.
Which basically means punishing an individual when the system fails.
Right. When a severely under-resourced, overburdened healthcare system fails and vulnerable patients die, there is a profound human need to assign blame. We want a villain.
It's much harder to accept that a baby died because the plumbing was failing or the hospital didn't have enough nurses.
Yes. The fear among many medical professionals observing this case, like Dr. Svelena Dimitrova and Professor Nina Modi, who have been vocal critics, is that Letby became the focal point, the scapegoat for systemic institutional collapse.
And if the hospital management is now being investigated for their role, I mean, a former executive of the hospital was actually arrested in April 2026.
Yes, on suspicion of perverting the course of justice related to a corporate manslaughter probe.
Doesn't that inherently support the theory that the hospital is trying to cover up their own systemic failures? by letting Letby take the fall?
It certainly provides heavy ammunition for that argument. The ongoing police probe called Operation Duet is looking specifically at corporate manslaughter and gross negligence manslaughter at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
And corporate manslaughter in the UK means an organization's management failures caused a person's death.
Exactly. If hospital executives are found to have hidden systemic dangers or ignored warnings about the safety of the ward, it reshapes the entire context of why those babies were collapsing.
Which is exactly why the statutory Thirlwall inquiry and the delayed coroner's inquests are so critical right now.
Yes, they are running parallel to the CCRC review, examining the exact same tragic events through entirely different legal lenses. The inquests have now been pushed to 2027.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's pull all these threads together.
It is a lot to synthesize.
We have a CCRC reviewing thousands of pages of new peer-reviewed science regarding immunoassay testing and premature infant metabolisms.
Right.
We have major statistical red flags regarding how the shift roster was compiled and the potential discarding of the prosecutor's fallacy. We have an undisclosed, highly damaging GMC investigation into the key prosecution expert.
And the newly discovered contemporaneous emails that reportedly conflict with the most damning eyewitness testimony.
Plus an ongoing active criminal probe into the hospital's management for corporate manslaughter.
That is the landscape of the new evidence. But as we must remind ourselves, on the other side of the ledger, we have 15 whole life terms handed down by juries who sat through months of grueling, meticulous, agonizing evidence.
And appellate judges who have twice previously reviewed the trial procedure and found no legal reason to overturn the verdicts.
The CCRC's task is monumental. They are not deciding if she is innocent. They must decide if this mountain of new evidence completely undermines the safety of those original verdicts enough to send it back to the Court of Appeal.
I mean, if the appellate courts ultimately decide that the complex medical and statistical science used in this trial was fundamentally flawed, it leaves you with a final provocative thought.
What's that?
It raises a terrifying question for the justice system. How many other convictions, in cases we've already forgotten about, were secured using the exact same playbook?
Because if the science was broken here, under the brightest spotlight in British legal history.
Exactly. With the whole world watching, we really have to wonder what's happening in the dark.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Navigating this kind of material isn't easy. It challenges our assumptions and asks us to look at terrible tragedies through a cold, objective lens. But understanding it is essential. Thank you for tuning in, and please subscribe to the Sleep Podcast channel if you enjoy these long-form investigative documentaries. Until next time, take care.